Thank you for tuning in to the AmeriCorps Monthly Paperwork Slideshow. In this slideshow, we're going to review all the paperwork members need to complete on a monthly basis. This should answer any questions you have about paperwork moving forward. At the end of the slideshow, you'll be prompted to go take a quiz online. This quiz needs to have a 100% score for all members. Let's get started. Here are some tips for completing your paperwork in a timely and accurate manner. Keep track of everything that you're doing. If you take the time to do a little bit of reporting every day, it'll save you a lot of time in the end. Members have told us that if they waited until the day their paperwork was due, it took them several hours to go back and reflect on the entire month. Take the time in advance to get things done. Once you're finished with all your monthly paperwork, you need to email your tracking form to ucanamericorps@gmail.com. This is our paperwork drop box. Please don't send any other correspondence to this email address, as we only check it monthly for monthly paperwork. If you have any questions about monthly paperwork or anything else, please contact Sarah. She's always available to help you out. In order to assist members in completing their monthly reports, we created a paperwork checklist. We expect you to attach the checklist to the front of your paperwork when you mail it in each month. This checklist will have you indicate which items are included in your packet. You'll do so by initialing the line so that we know what we're going to find when we open your paperwork packet. Let's take a closer look at the items on this checklist. Whoa, that's way too close. Let's back up just a little bit. Let's start by just looking at numbers 1 and 2. Number 1 refers to the monthly timesheets. Let's take a look. Here is what the timesheet looks like that members will be asked to complete twice a month. Timesheets are for the 1st through the 15th and the 16th through the end of the month. You can see here in our example, the member we have is Seth Kirby, and his host site is at UCAN. There are 3 categories on every timesheet: service hours, training hours, and fundraising hours. The first thing that you want to do when completing your timesheet is choose the correct date. I'll show you how on the next slide. Like I mentioned before, all timesheets refer to either the 1st through the 15th or the 16th through the end of the month. To choose the correct pay period, you want to select the top date on your screen. You see that highlighted in yellow here. When you select this date, a drop-down box occurs. Scroll down until you find the right date and year. Make sure you find the right year, because the days of the week auto-populates, and if you get it wrong, your whole pay period will be wrong and you'll have to redo your timesheet. Let's look at the type of hours that are on our timesheets. The first type of hours we're going to look at are service hours. Service hours refers to any hours that you're doing service at your site. So when you're working with kids, helping adults with their resumes, and/or helping support volunteers, those all count as service hours. Also, any travel time to trainings counts as service hours. Additionally, we're going to have 3 service days throughout the year. Service days count as service hours, not as training hours. Make sure you remember, service days equals service hours. Now let's look at adding training hours to your timesheet. Training hours go in the middle column. Training hours refer to any hours that you're receiving training from your site, any hours that you are at an AmeriCorps team training, or any hours that you're doing a professional development activity. Anytime you put in training hours, you'll see that your timesheet would like you to add in a comment. Please tell us what you were doing on those days when you counted training hours. The same is true for fundraising hours. Anytime you participate in a fundraising activity, like asking a business for a donation of an item for an event you're planning, working on a small grant, writing a letter campaign for donations to your project, or asking a professional to donate their professional services to your business, it counts as fundraising hours. When you enter fundraising hours in the fundraising column, it will ask you to put in a comment. You can see the example here. This person did 2 hours of fundraising on September 20th. They did a grant for after-school supplies. Grant writing and any fundraising hours cannot exceed 10% of your time on any timesheet. Please keep that in mind when you're working on fundraising activities. After you're done filling out your timesheet each pay period, you're going to want to print it. At that time, you need to sign and date your timesheets. Signing and dating your timesheets is very important in AmeriCorps. We can't accept any timesheets that aren't signed and dated. After that, you take your timesheet to your supervisor to sign and date. Please make sure that your supervisor's date never precedes yours. That's an important thing that we have to monitor in federal programming. We did it. Let's go on to item number 2 on the checklist, our monthly report form. Here is what the UCAN monthly activity report looks like. You can see that it's a list of questions that you need to answer in narrative format. There's also a checklist at the bottom. This checklist reinforces the checklist document that we ask you to complete and submit. Let's take a closer look at the items on the activity report. Before we take a look at the individual questions on the monthly report form, let's go over a couple of tips that can help you be successful. First of all monthly reports are due to our office no later than 5 p.m. on the 5th of each month. That means you should block out some time on the 1st or the 2nd to start working on your monthly report so you can have it in the mail in time. All monthly reports only cover 1 month, so make sure, even if you're doing a report on the 2nd or 3rd of each month, that you're not covering anything that happened after the last day of the preceding month. Meet with your supervisor on a monthly basis to go over your monthly reports. Because they sign off on your reports, they need to have a clear idea of what you're reporting to our office. They also can check your reports for accuracy in case you've forgotten something that you did during the month. If you collaborate with another member at your site, make sure that you're splitting any activities that you do. For example, if you hold a volunteer event and you're both working on the event together, decide who's going to count those volunteers on their report. We want to make sure that we're not double counting any volunteers or participants. Lastly, always keep a copy for your own records. You might want to reflect on your reports later, and/or your site might need to look over them after you finish your service. Let's move on and look at the questions. The first question on the monthly report asks you to address what achievements you're making that are helping make your projects stronger and/or providing for long-term sustainability. This is important because all national service programs need to address how they're working to sustain their actions. Ideas for what you might list here include documenting the activities that you're doing working with children, documenting new processes for how things work, or helping your supervisor come up with a strategic plan on how the project will be sustained once there is no longer an AmeriCorps in that position. These are just ideas. Talk to your supervisor about what long-term sustainability plans they have in mind for you. The next question asks for you to provide stories of interest. What we're looking for here is stories about the people that you're serving. Tell us about a student that you're working with or an individual that you've been supporting with your project. We'd love to hear how they're changing or being changed by the work that you're doing. If you can't think of any stories like this during your last month, please share something about your experience, what you're learning, what skills you're gaining, how national service might be changing you. We share all these stories with the Corporation for National and Community Service, so be sure to think about it. Also, writing a sentence is not a story. Make sure that the story makes sense and that it might be interesting. Don't worry if you're not a good writer. We can always help you if we decide to put your story in one of our member newsletters. Question 3 wants to know if you've collaborated with any other members at your site or at other sites. Please tell us what you've been doing together. Our project loves to see members working together. If you are volunteering at all outside of your service site, please tell us a little bit about your volunteer experience. You also list volunteer time on your tracking form, but this will give us a better idea of what exactly you're doing. The next question refers to anything that you're doing that's outside of what would be considered your work plan. This might be something that you came up with collaboratively with your project supervisor, or an idea you and another member came up with. Have you developed any resources or community partnerships? What are you doing in the community besides working on your project, if anything? At the bottom of the page is a checklist to reinforce what items you might want to attach to your monthly activity report. We've already started going over the monthly paperwork checklist, and we reviewed the timesheets. Tracking sheets are next, so let's go ahead and look at the other items on the list. If your site has been covered in any media, please share it with us. This might include making a copy of a newspaper article or sending us the link to a video that's online. We share media coverage with the Corporation for National and Community Service. It helps build more program emphasis around our program in Southwest Oregon, and it helps promote national service statewide. If you have any training hours on your timesheet, you're going to want to make sure that you've included documentation of the trainings and/or meetings that you've attended. This might include an agenda or a certificate of some sort. A lot of times when you attend an online webinar, they send you the registration via email. These are the documentations that we need to verify that you've participated in trainings. Once you've completed your monthly activity report, you need to print it out and sign and date it, just like your timesheets. Please keep in mind the same rules around making sure that your supervisor signs after you. The monthly activity report and the timesheets always need to be submitted with the original PIN signatures sent to our office. We cannot accept copies of either of these items, nor can they be emailed to us. Now back to the monthly report checklist. It looks like we're going to go to numbers 3 and 4. So let's take a look at the numbers 3 and 4. I suspect Seth had something to do with this. Let's go ahead and look at number 3, the tracking form. Let's cover a few things about the tracking forms before we take a look at them. The first thing you should know is that the tracking form is an ongoing document. You should never delete things off the tracking form. By the end of your service, we should have a clear picture of all the activities you did in the entire year. You also don't have to fill out every page of the tracking form. Every member has certain performance areas they work in, and those are the tracking pages that you're going to need to complete each month. If you have any questions about the content on each tracking form and whether or not it applies to your service, there is an informational box to the right of each page that explains what this tracking form refers to and how you complete it. Also remember from before, if you collaborate with other members at your site, make sure you're both not counting the same people. You don't want to double count participants or volunteers. Tracking forms do not get printed and mailed to our office each month. Instead, we ask that you email them to our email drop box, ucanamericorps@gmail.com. It's a good idea to copy your supervisor when you email in the tracking form. When you open the tracking form, this is what you'll see. You can see at the bottom all the tabs that we have for members to complete. Let's take a look at Education, Healthy Futures, and Economic Opportunity first. There is some consistent data that needs to be recorded across the Education, Healthy Futures, and Economic Opportunity tabs. If you're not sure which of these tabs you should complete, please read the description to the far right. It explains what each of the tabs refers to. The information you need to capture for each of these areas is the date the activity took place, a brief description of the activity you provided, and what tool you used to track your participants. Did you have a sign-in sheet? Do you use a roster? Do you use the classroom attendance log? Let us know so we know how you're tracking it. and make sure you're keeping a copy of whatever tool you're using at your site. You also need to capture the number of participants you had participate in your activity along with the number of first-time participants. It's important to note that the first time you work with anyone, they should be listed in the first-time participants category. At the end of your service term, the first-time participants column will tell us exactly how many participants you worked with in total. If you have any questions about this and how you might capture first-time participants, talk with your site supervisor about ideas or contact our office and we can talk about it as well. Like I mentioned before, all of those tabs, Education, Healthy Futures A, Healthy Futures B, and Economic Opportunity, all include the same data. The one exception is the Education tab. This tab also asks for the number of participants that completed the activity. It's important to get a good count of how many people were able to actually finish the activity that you provided. At some sites, children come and go and don't necessarily finish what the member was covering. At other sites, members will facilitate activities that last for several weeks long. It helps us a lot to know how many people actually start and finish the things that you're doing. Please make sure you make notes of that every time you work with participants. The next tab we're going to look at is volunteer tracking. One of the things you'll notice about this tab as we go through it is that each volunteer is listed only once on the tracking form. You can then list how much they volunteer each month. Do not indicate national service members on the tracking form. Unfortunately, the corporation does not allow us to count national service members as leveraged volunteers. So if you're asking other national service members to volunteer for your project, make sure you do not track them on this form. If an individual is volunteering their professional time, it should not be listed on the volunteer tracking form. They should be listed as an in-kind donation. Examples of this would be a tax preparer who is doing tax services at your organization, or a carpenter who is building shelves for your project. Here's what the volunteer tracking form looks like. You can see here that you list the volunteer's name, the position or title of what they were doing at your organization, the date they first volunteered at your site, whether you recruited them or not, and then whether you trained them for the project they're doing or not. The items that are highlighted in yellow are demographic information about volunteers that the Corporation for National and Community Service asks us to track. Definitions for each of these categories is to the right. Ways that you might find this information is through a volunteer application that your organization uses or a survey that you ask volunteers to complete at a community event. You can also speak with your site supervisor about some of these categories to see what advice they have for collecting the data. If you're unable to collect the data, don't worry about it. Just leave the space blank or list it as a no. Yes or no's is what we're looking for in these categories. If you scroll to the right, here are those definitions I was talking about. All the months of your service term are highlighted in yellow on the screen. You will simply list how many hours your volunteer volunteered each month. There's no reason to ever list a volunteer on the tracking form more than once. Next, let's take a look at the Trainings tab. The Trainings tab covers any hours that are under the training column on your timesheet. These two documents should always match. Things that should be covered on this tab include trainings that you receive that are brought to you by your site supervisor and your site, those trainings which UCAN provides, and any trainings you attend for personal and/or professional development. You can also list the 1 hour of journaling you are permitted to do with AmeriCorps every month. Also, the 3 community meetings members are asked to attend need to be tracked here, as well as the up to 16 hours of volunteering you can do for civic engagement. Let's take a closer look at trainings that you might receive and how you track those on this form. If you attended a training that your site provided, one that UCAN provided, or one that you elected to take yourself by submitting a professional development training proposal, you need to complete the following information. Please provide us with a date. From the choices, select Training. Provide a description of what the training was and whether or not it was valuable to you. Let us know what organization provided the training, who a contact is at that organization, and their phone number. Also, please let us know how many hours the training will be counted on your timesheet. Make sure this information matches. Any trainings that you attend that are not provided by UCAN need to include documentation. Documentation can include things like an agenda for the training or a cover of the training handbook. Other examples of things that count as documentation are listed to the right and highlighted in yellow. If you elect to do journaling about your service every month, all you need to provide us with is the date we can find it on your timesheet, that the activity was just journaling, and the hour that you spent every month. If you break up your journaling time across several days in the month, you'll need to break it out in this report also. You do not need to provide us with any documentation if you elect to do a reflective journal. We will never ask to read your journal or look over any of the information. Members need to document the 3 required community meetings on this tracking form as well. For community meetings, please list the date. Under the Identify category, write Community Meeting, and then under Description, write what the name of the meeting was. Community meeting attendance also requires documentation, just like trainings you receive from your site or those trainings you elect to attend on your own. Documentation for community meetings can attend agendas or minutes from the meeting. A description of the community meeting information is to the right and highlighted. Please also make sure that you include the hours that match your timesheet. Members are able to volunteer up to 16 hours a year as part of their civic engagement requirement. If you've elected to volunteer, you need to list it on this tracking form. The information we need for volunteering includes the date, listing it as volunteering, giving us a brief description of what you did, providing us with the organization's name that you volunteered with, a contact at that organization, and their contact information. If you volunteered for another member, please provide us with their site supervisor's contact information. Members should not vouch for each other on this form. Please also make sure to include the hours you volunteered. This should also match the hours that you reflected on your timesheet. Don't forget, members can only volunteer up to 16 hours during their entire service term and count it on their timesheets. If you need any additional information about the volunteer requirement, please read the highlighted section to the right. The last tab on the tracking form we're going to take a look at is the Donations tab. For any donations you solicit for your project, you need to account for them here. Things we need to know about any donations you receive are the date that it was donated, the donor name or the organization that provided the donation, a description of what was donated, the quantity, and the total cash donation value. Also be sure to include information about how you used the donation that you received. Don't forget, any professional services that you received need to be accounted for under the Donations tab, not under the Volunteer Tracking tab. Take a look at the examples provided to get an idea of what I mean. Now we've gone over the entire tracking form. Let's get back to the checklist and see what we have left to cover. Let's take a look at the Other Reports section and see what items you might want to include with your paperwork every month. Don't worry, we're almost to the end, just a little bit longer. That's better. Look how happy that dog is buried in paperwork. You can thank Seth for this. Other forms you might want to include in your monthly paperwork include a mileage reimbursement form. Mileage reimbursement is for member travel related to any AmeriCorps trainings. This does not include traveling to and from your site and/or traveling for your site. If you're claiming mileage, you need to indicate your name, the month you're reporting, the date, the destination of your travel, the reason you traveled, and your odometer readings. Odometer readings are part of the requirement for UCAN's payroll department, so please make sure you include it. The total mileage should populate automatically in this Excel spreadsheet. We require that members carpool for almost all team events. If you're not sure who you should carpool with or if there's enough people in the area to do so, please contact our office. Otherwise, the requirement is a driver plus 2 team members. All mileage reimbursements must be submitted within 30 days of your travel request to receive reimbursement. Any that are received late will not be paid. At your midterm, you will do an evaluation of your host site supervisor. This is due on February 5th. It's included on your Other Reports section so you can remember when it's due. Now let's talk about the next couple of items on the list. Civic engagement documentation refers to any of the stuff documenting your civic engagement requirements. This includes meeting agendas and minutes for the 3 meetings that you attend during your service term. We also talked about media coverage already, but let's look closer at what would be required for member development documentation. This document is the proposal form for other member development. Members can spend up to 15% of their time in development during their service term, and one of the ways they can do so is by doing their own self-guided personal and professional development. This might include taking a class at the college or participating in a workshop in the community. If you would like to participate in one of these development opportunities, you need to submit this form. It includes your name, your site, the date of your proposed training, and the estimated number of hours that will be involved. All development proposals must be 40 hours or less. There are also some questions we'd like you to reflect on when thinking about taking a community training or a personal development opportunity. We would like for you to describe the project and the activity that you're proposing, what your desired outcome is, how this activity will improve your understanding or connection to national service, if it will at all, and how you think it will improve your ability at your placement site, and how you think it will develop your personal life skills. After you finish answering these questions, you need to print this document, sign it and date it, and have your supervisor sign and date it as well. After that, submit it to the UCA office. The program director must approve your request before you start counting any hours on your timesheet. You can turn in these requests at any time. They can be scanned and emailed to our office, or faxed, or dropped by, or put in the mail. There's just a couple more items on the Other Reports section. The first is field assignments. Occasionally during your service term, we'll ask you to do a couple of things at your site, but they're for the team meetings. The first will have to do with going to a community meeting and observing a leader in your community, but we'll get to that later. The second is a service day report. Service day reports are where you reflect on the service that you do at any of the mandatory service days. Service days include Make a Difference Day on October 24th, MLK Day Service Week in January, and our Service Day in late June. You'll see at the bottom of the checklist that it provides you with our address. Please mail the checklist, your monthly report form, and your timesheets to our address at 308 Southeast Jackson Street. We need the original copies with all of your signatures in ink. If for some reason your paperwork needs corrections, for example, if your training tracking form doesn't match your timesheets, we will send you an email notifying you of the corrections that are necessary. We ask that all corrections be submitted back to our office within 1 week of notification. All of the reports that we do lead up to us doing a large report for the corporation, so timely submission of reports is really important. It's always important to check and double-check your work. Make sure that you are the first person that signs any of your paperwork. Members' signatures and dates have to precede those of their supervisors. So print your paperwork, sign and date it, then pass it to your supervisor to sign and date before mailing it. We need to have your signatures in ink. No copies of paperwork can be submitted. Only the tracking form can be emailed. Please make sure to email it to ucanamericorps@gmail.com. We don't need a hard copy of the tracking form, so save yourself the paper and don't bother printing it. Mileage sheets must be submitted within 30 days to receive the reimbursement, so make sure you stay on top of that. You can always fax, email, drop by, or mail any mileage reimbursement forms. You don't have to send them with your monthly report. In order to reinforce that your timesheet and your tracking forms need to match, we provided you with an example to look at. You'll note that Seth attended a training on 10/17 for peer power mentoring. This training lasted for 7 hours. On the 18th, he journaled for 1 hour. Now if you look at his timesheet, you'll see those exact same times and some comments reflected on the timesheet. It's very important for these two things to match. If for some reason they don't match, you'll get an email from our office giving you 1 week to make any necessary corrections. Now that we've finished covering all the member paperwork, it's time for you to test your knowledge. We've developed a quiz which we'd like you to take. The link for that quiz is at the bottom of your screen. All members need to take this quiz until they receive 100%. Once you've received 100%, you need to print that page and include it with your monthly paperwork. As we go throughout the year, everybody's going to make mistakes on their paperwork. It's only natural. Federal reporting can be very difficult and cumbersome, and we know and appreciate that. Don't take it personally if we give you a lot of things to correct. It's just the nature of how things work in federal programs. If you ever have questions or need additional assistance with your paperwork, please don't hesitate to contact me.